Welcome to my latest dark history and hauntings video. Today's video is all about Whittingham Hospital, a mental institution that was once one of the largest and most innovative in the UK. But behind its walls, patients suffered years of mistreatment and neglect, leading to one of the biggest scandals in the history of psychiatric care. In this video, we'll explore the dark history of Whittingham Hospital, from its beginnings in the 19th century to its eventual closure in the 20th century. We will then take a look into the ghosts that are believed to still linger inside the grounds of this old abandoned building. We'll uncover the shocking practices that took place within its walls and examine the impact that the hospital had on mental health care in the UK. Join us as we delve into the scandalous story of Whittingham Hospital. Whittingham Hospital was founded in 1869 and opened its doors to patients in 1873. The hospital was designed by Henry Littler, a prominent architect of the time who specialized in the design of hospitals and asylums. At its peak, the hospital was a self-contained village with its own farms, gardens, and even a railway station. Whittingham Hospital was initially run by the Lancashire County Council, but it was later taken over by the National Health Service, NHS, in 1948. At its height, the hospital housed over 3,500 patients and employed more than 1,000 staff. It was considered a model institution for the treatment of mental illness, and it was known for its innovative therapies and research. However, over time, the hospital's reputation began to decline. Reports of patient abuse, neglect, and poor living conditions began to emerge, and the hospital's management was accused of covering up these abuses. The abuse that took place at Whittingham Hospital was shocking and widespread. Patients were subjected to physical and emotional abuse, and many were left in dirty and overcrowded conditions. In 1967, a nurse named Barbara Robb published a book called Sans Everything, A Case to Answer, in which she detailed the abuses she had witnessed. Her book sparked a public outcry and led to a government inquiry into the hospital's practices. The inquiry, which was led by Sir John Boynton, uncovered a culture of abuse and neglect at the hospital. Patients were locked up in padded cells for long periods of time, they were tied to chairs, and they were left without food or water. In some cases, patients were even sexually abused by hospital staff. The inquiry also found that the hospital's management had covered up these abuses, and that the hospital staff were reluctant to speak out for fear of losing their jobs. As a result of the inquiry, several members of the hospital staff were dismissed or disciplined, and the hospital was eventually closed down. The abuses that took place at Whittingham Hospital were a tragedy for the patients who suffered under its care. But they also serve as a reminder of the importance of transparency and accountability in the provision of psychiatric care, and of the need to prioritize the well-being of patients above all else. Whittingham Hospital was a place of horror for many of its patients. The hospital employed a range of therapies that were often cruel and ineffective, and which caused lasting physical and emotional harm. One of the most brutal treatments used at the hospital was electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. Patients were strapped to a table and subjected to a powerful electric shock that caused their bodies to convulse uncontrollably. Many patients were left traumatized by the experience, with some suffering memory loss or permanent brain damage. Insulin coma therapy was another barbaric treatment used at the hospital. Patients were injected with insulin to induce a coma, a state that was believed to have therapeutic benefits. However, the therapy was often administered without proper monitoring, and many patients died or suffered permanent brain damage as a result. The hospital's approach to occupational therapy was also harsh and punitive. Patients were forced to perform menial tasks, such as laundry or cleaning, with little regard for their individual needs or abilities. Those who refused were often punished with restraints or other forms of physical abuse. Despite these cruel and ineffective treatments, the hospital staff were often more concerned with maintaining order and control than with treating their patients with compassion and respect. There were numerous deaths that occurred at Whittingham Hospital, some of which were the result of the hospital's neglectful and abusive practices. An inquiry into the hospital's practices found that at least 29 patients had died as a result of overdoses of sedatives and other drugs. Many of these patients were elderly and had been given high doses of medication, without proper monitoring or supervision. There were also reports of patients being restrained for extended periods of time, sometimes in uncomfortable or dangerous positions, leading to injuries and even death. In addition to these specific incidents, many patients died due to the overall neglect and poor living conditions at the hospital. Patients were often left in overcrowded and unsanitary wards, with little access to fresh air or exercise. This led to a high rate of infections and illnesses, which in turn contributed to the hospital's high mortality rate. Whittingham Hospital was closed in stages over the course of several years, with the last patients leaving in 1995. The closure was the result of a combination of factors, including changes in mental health policy and a growing recognition of the hospital's failures and abuses. One of the key events that led to the hospital's closure was the publication of a report by the Ministry of Health, which detailed the hospital's poor conditions and mistreatment of patients. The report highlighted the hospital's high mortality rate and the prevalence of abuse and neglect, and called for urgent reforms. Despite these recommendations, the hospital's problems persisted. A series of scandals further eroded public trust in the hospital. A report by the National Health Service, NHS, identified serious deficiencies in the hospital's management and care, including inadequate staffing and poor record-keeping. The hospital's closure was further hastened by changes in mental health policy in the 1980s and 1990s. The closure of large psychiatric institutions, like Whittingham, was seen as part of a broader shift towards community-based care, and the deinstitutionalization of mental health services. Finally, in 1992, a damning report by the NHS Inspectorate recommended the closure of the hospital, citing ongoing concerns about poor care, abuse, and neglect. The report also called for an investigation into allegations of financial impropriety and corruption at the hospital. Following this report, the hospital was gradually phased out, with patients being moved to other facilities or discharged into the community. The last patients left the hospital in 1995, and the site was eventually sold to a property development firm. Now onto the paranormal side of Whittingham Hospital. It's no surprise that with so many deaths, and so much pain and sorrow happening within the walls of Whittingham Hospital, that this building is supposedly one of the most haunted locations in the UK. There have been many reports of paranormal activity at the abandoned Whittingham Hospital over the years. Visitors to the site have reported strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and other unexplained phenomena. Some of the most commonly reported paranormal occurrences include sightings of a ghostly nurse pushing a trolley down the hospital corridors, the sound of footsteps and screams echoing through the empty wards, and strange lights and shadows moving through the buildings. The first ghost that is said to haunt Whittingham Hospital is the Blue Lady. The story of the Blue Lady is a haunting and tragic tale that has sent shivers down the spines of those who have heard it. The young woman's suffering was so great that even the best efforts of the hospital staff could not save her, and she died alone in one of the hospital's dimly lit wards. As her body was laid to rest in a blue dress, the legend of the Blue Lady was born. Visitors to the hospital soon began to report sightings of a ghostly figure dressed in blue, wandering the halls and corridors of the abandoned building. Some claimed to have heard her voice echoing through the halls, while others reported feeling a cold breeze as she passed by. The Blue Lady's ghostly form is said to haunt the hospital's clock tower, a symbol of the passage of time and the fragility of life. For those who have experienced her presence, the memory of her haunting presence lingers long after they have left the hospital's abandoned halls. There have been many reported sightings of the Blue Lady over the years, but one of the most famous stories comes from a group of paranormal investigators who visited the abandoned Whittingham Hospital in the late 1990s. According to their account, the investigators were exploring the hospital's clock tower when they suddenly heard a strange noise coming from the stairwell. As they turned to investigate, they saw the ghostly figure of a woman dressed in a blue gown, slowly descending the stairs towards them. As the figure approached, the investigators were overcome with a sense of dread and fear, and they quickly retreated from the tower. When they returned to their base camp, they discovered that their cameras and other equipment had malfunctioned, leaving them with no photographic evidence of the encounter. The ghostly nurse of Whittingham Hospital is another famous apparition that is said to haunt the abandoned halls of the hospital. According to legend, the nurse was a young woman who worked at the hospital and was known for her kind and caring demeanor towards the patients in her care. However, one day the nurse was accused of stealing medicine from the hospital and was subsequently fired from her job. Distraught and humiliated, the nurse is said to have taken her own life. Since her death, visitors to the abandoned hospital have reported sightings of a ghostly figure dressed in a nurse's uniform, wandering the halls and corridors of the building. Some have reported feeling a chill in the air, or hearing the sound of footsteps approaching, only to see the figure of the nurse vanish before their eyes. While the story of the ghostly nurse is a tragic one, it has helped to fuel the legend of Whittingham Hospital as one of the most haunted places in the UK. Her ghostly presence serves as a reminder of the many lives that were touched by the hospital's dark history, and the enduring legacy of the site as a place of pain, suffering, and sorrow. One of the most famous sightings of the ghostly nurse of Whittingham when a group of visitors were exploring the abandoned building. As they walked through one of the dimly lit corridors, they suddenly heard the sound of soft footsteps approaching from behind them. Turning around, they saw the figure of a woman dressed in a nurse's uniform, her face obscured by the shadows. The woman appeared to be searching for something, her hands moving slowly over the walls and floors as she searched for a lost item. As the group watched in stunned silence, the figure suddenly vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but an eerie silence in the stillness of the abandoned building. Of course, the legend of the boy ghost at Whittingham Hospital is one that has captured the imaginations of visitors for years, and it's easy to see why. The thought of a young child haunting the halls of an abandoned hospital, crying out for help and searching for a way to escape, is enough to send shivers down the spine of even the most skeptical. The story of the boy's death is shrouded in mystery and speculation, with some versions of the legend suggesting that he was the victim of medical experimentation or other nefarious practices at the hospital. Others claim that he died of a terminal illness, alone and frightened in a hospital room, with no one to comfort him in his final moments. Whatever the truth of his story may be, there is no denying the eerie and unsettling atmosphere that pervades the former children's ward at Whittingham Hospital. Visitors have reported feeling a sense of unease and sadness as they walk through the silent halls, as if they can still hear the faint sound of a child crying out for help. Some have even claimed to have seen the ghostly figure of the boy himself, dressed in a hospital gown and wandering through the corridors. His ghostly presence is said to be particularly strong in the room where he died, where visitors have reported feeling cold spots and hearing strange noises. There have been many reported sightings of the ghost boy at Whittingham Hospital over the years, with visitors claiming to have seen his ghostly figure wandering the halls of the former children's ward. One particularly eerie sighting occurred when a group of paranormal investigators visited the hospital to conduct a nighttime investigation. As they were walking through the children's ward, they suddenly heard the sound of a child crying out for help. Startled, they shone their flashlights in the direction of the sound, and were shocked to see the ghostly figure of a young boy standing in the hallway. He was dressed in a hospital gown, and appeared to be staring off into the distance with a look of sadness on his face. The investigators watched in silence as the ghostly boy slowly faded away, leaving behind only an unsettling feeling of unease and sadness. To this day, they remain convinced that they witnessed the ghostly presence of the boy who died at Whittingham Hospital so many years ago. Other visitors to the hospital have reported hearing the sound of a child crying or laughing in the children's ward, and some have even claimed to have seen toys moving on their own or strange, shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the room. Whether or not these sightings can be attributed to the ghost of the boy who died at Whittingham Hospital, there is no denying the eerie and unsettling atmosphere that pervades the hospitals. Abandoned halls, and the power of the legend to capture the imaginations of visitors to this day. I hope you enjoy today's video. If so, you may want to subscribe, so not to miss any more of my dark history and hauntings videos.